I'm here with Prince Harry. Prince Harry. Harry.
I actually said you can call me whatever you want.
Okay.
The decision has been a surprise.
Just before the palace settled into another carefully controlled evening, a private message arrived through a channel few outsiders knew existed. It carried Meghan's name, demanded absolute secrecy, and contained one request so unexpected that senior courtiers reportedly refused to forward it until Catherine had been warned. For years, the palace had learned to live with the tension surrounding Meghan and Harry. It remained beneath every careful statement, every family appearance, and every silence that lasted slightly too long. On the surface, the monarchy continued with its familiar discipline. Behind closed doors, however, few believed the conflict had truly ended. It had simply changed shape. That was why the message caused immediate alarm. It had not come through Meghan's lawyers, publicists, or official representatives. Instead, it was delivered by a trusted intermediary whose relationship with both the Sussexes and the royal household stretched back years. That choice appeared deliberate. It gave the request the intimacy of a family appeal while avoiding the formal channels designed to record, control, and contain such approaches. Across the top were two words: strictly private. Only a handful of people were supposed to read it. Yet Catherine's name appeared again and again, even though the request was formally directed toward King Charles. Almost immediately, palace aides began asking the same troubling question. Why was the Princess of Wales so central to something Meghan claimed was about reconciliation? Some believed the message was sincere. They saw a woman seeking a path back into a family fractured by accusation, distance, and pride. Others viewed it as a carefully constructed challenge, one designed to force the palace into making a decision it could never fully explain without exposing its own hidden rules. Then came the first unsettling clue. Meghan was not simply requesting a private meeting. She was not asking for another invitation, a quiet conversation, or even a public gesture of peace. She wanted access to something controlled by William and Catherine, something tied to their future authority and the place their children would one day occupy within the monarchy. Harry's position made the situation even more disturbing. According to those briefed on the message, he supported the request in principle, yet refused to deliver it himself. Was he afraid of his father's reaction? Ashamed of what Meghan was asking? Or had the proposal expanded beyond the private promise he originally made? Catherine was not shown the full document. She was only warned that Meghan's proposal could affect her children, her future as queen, and the public image of the crown. The issue was connected to an old palace tradition involving inheritance, family legitimacy, and who could represent the monarchy during moments of national importance. Before the message could be secured, someone made a copy. That single act transformed a private request into a weapon and ensured that the truth would not remain hidden for long. But before Catherine could learn what Meghan had actually demanded, palace officials began tracing the request back to a private conversation that had taken place weeks earlier, and Harry's role in that conversation raised even darker questions. Weeks before the request reached the palace, Harry allegedly made Meghan a promise during an emotional late-night conversation. He assured her that one royal door remained open, but what Meghan believed he had offered, and what Harry may actually have meant, were two dangerously different things. By then, Harry was carrying pressures he rarely admitted aloud. Distance from his father and brother had hardened into something deeper than anger. It had become uncertainty. He was still a prince, still connected to generations of royal history, yet increasingly unsure where he belonged within it. More painful was the thought that Archie and Lilibet might grow up knowing the monarchy only through photographs, headlines, and stories shaped by conflict. That fear made him vulnerable. During the conversation, Harry reportedly spoke of an arrangement that might one day allow the children limited access to royal life. Not a full return, not restored duties. Something quieter, private family appearances, ceremonial involvement, and a chance for the next generation to remain connected to traditions that had survived for centuries. Harry believed he was expressing hope. Meghan heard possibility. To her, his words suggested that the palace was already preparing for reconciliation, even if no one was willing to admit it publicly. She began to see the conversation not as a husband sharing an emotional wish, but as permission to test the royal gates. Soon, trusted intermediaries were being approached. Careful questions were being asked, and a private hope was slowly transformed into a formal proposal. But Harry wanted patience. Meghan believed patience was dangerous. Every month they waited, William and Catherine appeared more secure. Their influence grew, their children became more central, and the future of the monarchy seemed to close around them. Meghan feared that Archie and Lilibet would eventually be remembered as royal names without royal places, connected by blood, yet absent from the story. Her request was therefore about more than emotion. It touched titles, recognition, public relevance, and legacy. Harry understood the risk. His greatest fear was not that Charles would simply say no. It was that William would see the approach as an attempt to go around him, and that Catherine would interpret it as a challenge to her future authority. Then palace officials discovered something even more troubling. Meghan's message reportedly included details from her private conversations with Harry, making the proposal appear fully authorized. When those details were compared with Harry's own account, the meanings did not align. Charles received an early verbal summary and reacted with caution rather than fury. He knew one careless answer could reopen every wound the family had spent years trying to contain. William was less trusting. He suspected Harry's longing for reconciliation was being used to secure a position Meghan could never obtain through formal protocol. And at the center of everything was a future royal event where Catherine's place had already been decided and was considered untouchable. The deeper palace officials examined Meghan's proposal. The clearer it became that this was not merely a family appeal, it was connected to a ceremony, a royal privilege, and a place beside the crown that Catherine had spent years preparing to occupy. Hidden beneath Meghan's carefully chosen language was a tradition rarely discussed outside royal walls. It was not protected by law, yet generations had obeyed it without question. Breaking it would not remove Catherine's title, but it could publicly weaken everything that title represented. The custom had survived because it was never fully written down. There was no public rulebook explaining who could enter the monarchy's most private commemorations, succession-related gatherings, or family ceremonies connected to the crown's future. Yet everyone inside the institution understood the boundaries. Access depended on hierarchy, on bloodline, on marriage, loyalty, and trust. Above all, it depended on the monarch's personal approval. Catherine had gradually inherited the responsibility of protecting those boundaries. As Princess of Wales and the woman expected one day to become queen, she was no longer attending these occasions as merely William's wife. She represented continuity. Her presence carried authority, and the positions around her were treated as symbols of who truly stood at the center of the monarchy. Meghan's proposal threatened to disturb that order. She was reportedly asking for an exception usually reserved for active senior royals or people directly representing the sovereign. The request did not seek the burdens of royal service, the controlled schedule, the required silence, or the constant surrender of personal freedom. Yet it appeared to demand the symbolic recognition those sacrifices provided. That was what made the issue so personal for Catherine. Meghan seemed to be asking to stand beside her as an equal royal figure without returning to the system Catherine had spent years obeying. Every public smile, every restrained response, every private disappointment Catherine had buried in service to the crown suddenly felt as though it could be dismissed with one special arrangement. But Meghan may have seen the matter differently. From her perspective, the monarchy had benefited from her name, her global reach, and the attention she brought to the royal family. She may have believed that leaving official duties should not erase her place within its history or deny her children recognition. Then, Diana's legacy entered the request. The proposal was reportedly connected to a future memorial observance and private material associated with Harry and William's mother. Access would allow Meghan to stand inside a deeply emotional royal story traditionally guarded by William, Catherine, and the palace. Courtiers immediately divided. Refusal could make Meghan appear excluded and her children punished. Acceptance could weaken Catherine's position and reward years of public confrontation. There were also troubling questions about photographs, press access, seating order, and whether Archie and Lilibet would receive formal acknowledgement. William recognized the danger at once. A private tradition could become an international spectacle. Then, Catherine was summoned. She still had not seen the sentence Meghan had written about her. When Catherine finally entered the briefing room, she expected another difficult conversation about Harry, but the document waiting on the table was focused on Meghan, her children, and a royal position Catherine believed had already been settled. Catherine entered expecting a diplomatic problem. Instead, she found her own name woven through a proposal that questioned her authority, her judgment, and even her right to decide who could stand beside the next generation of royals. Then she reached the paragraph that changed everything. She read without speaking. Charles remained guarded. William watched every change in her expression, and the senior advisors around them understood that this was no longer an ordinary palace dispute. Meghan's request was written in the language of healing, family, and compassion. Yet beneath those careful words was a direct demand: Catherine herself should approve the arrangement. Not the palace, not the king. Catherine, the message repeatedly presented her as the one person capable of opening, or permanently closing, the path between Harry's children and their royal heritage. By placing that responsibility in Catherine's hands, Meghan had made neutrality impossible. A refusal could be portrayed as cruelty. An acceptance could weaken the boundaries Catherine had spent years protecting. Then came the most personal argument. Meghan referred to her own painful experiences inside the monarchy and suggested Catherine had a moral duty to prevent the same isolation from reaching Archie and Lilibet. The implication was sharp. If Catherine denied the request, she would not simply be defending protocol. She would be allowing history to repeat itself. For Catherine, the choice felt almost impossible. She could protect a privilege linked to her own children and their future, or risk appearing to reject two innocent children because of a conflict created by adults. William reacted more openly. He believed the wording had been designed to create guilt now and public pressure later. Charles faced a different torment. He wanted contact with his grandchildren, but he knew that forcing Catherine to surrender ground would deepen the fracture with William and place the monarchy's future against his private hopes as a father. The proposal then went further. It suggested a joint public appearance involving Meghan, Catherine, and their children, presented as a powerful symbol of royal unity. It also sought recognition for Meghan within a future ceremony connected to Diana, using Harry's position as Diana's son to strengthen the claim. As Catherine continued reading, she noticed familiar phrases, language echoing earlier Sussex statements about healing, fairness, and institutional harm. That resemblance raised a chilling possibility. Selected parts of the request could one day be released, leaving Catherine blamed for whatever came next. She lowered the document and asked the question everyone else had avoided. What exactly is she asking to take my place in? The answer was finally given, and it was far more explosive than a photograph, a family meeting, or a ceremonial invitation, because Meghan was asking for access to a role Catherine believed belonged to the future queen alone. The secret was no longer buried in diplomatic language. Meghan had requested permission to return for a major royal commemoration, appear beside Catherine as an equal family representative, and secure a permanent ceremonial place for Archie and Lilibet without resuming the duties the Sussexes had abandoned. The proposal centered on a future event tied not only to the crown, but to Diana's memory. Meghan wanted to return to Britain under special conditions and take part in a commemoration carrying enormous emotional weight for both Harry and William. Yet her request went far beyond simple attendance. She wanted to stand beside Catherine in a role symbolizing the monarchy's next generation of royal mothers. Not behind her, not as a private guest. Beside her, Archie and Lilibet, according to the proposal, would also be included alongside George, Charlotte, and Louis during private preparations and selected official moments. The arrangement would create the appearance of a reunited royal generation, bound together by family history despite years of division. But there was a condition that changed everything. Meghan and Harry would not be required to return as full-time working royals. They would not accept the daily discipline of palace oversight, surrender control of their public image, or abandon their independent commercial lives. They would receive the visibility and ceremonial recognition of senior royalty without taking back the restrictions that came with it. That was why Catherine had been stunned. For years, she had endured scrutiny, silence, and sacrifice because the role demanded it. Meghan now appeared to be asking for the symbol of that duty without carrying its burden. The most controversial demand was even more personal. Meghan wanted Catherine's public endorsement. The palace would not present the arrangement as a reluctant compromise approved by Charles. It would be framed as two women choosing reconciliation, with Catherine visibly welcoming Meghan back into the royal story. The request also included private access to items connected to Diana, including pieces Catherine had reportedly been trusted to help preserve for future generations. Selected details from the commemoration could be documented, raising immediate fears over how private moments might later be used in interviews, productions, or public campaigns. Charles considered protecting one part of the proposal, the children. William refused anything that could restore Meghan's former standing by another name. Catherine understood that Archie and Lilibet were innocent, yet she could also see the trap. Her compassion was being placed against the institution she was expected to defend. Then another disturbing possibility emerged. Harry may not have known every condition, especially the demand for Catherine's personal public support. Before Catherine could answer, fragments of the request escaped palace control. A private decision had become a global confrontation. Once the request leaked, Catherine was no longer deciding behind closed doors. Every silence looked like rejection. Every compromise looked like surrender, and Meghan's next move suggested the exposure may not have been an accident at all. Within minutes, fragments of the request began circulating beyond palace walls. The wording was incomplete, the context was missing, and yet one message dominated: Meghan had offered peace, and Catherine had not answered. Behind the scenes, officials feared they were witnessing a carefully prepared trap. Selected details reached journalists, commentators, and royal observers before palace advisors had agreed on a response. The leaked version emphasized reconciliation, family healing, and the future of Archie and Lilibet. It presented Meghan as a mother asking that her children not be separated from their heritage. What it did not mention was just as important. There was no reference to the ceremonial equality Meghan had requested, the joint public role beside Catherine, or the access to private items connected to Diana. The most controversial conditions vanished, leaving Catherine's silence exposed without the context that explained her hesitation. The reaction was immediate. Some accused Catherine of protecting status over family. Others claimed she possessed the power to end the conflict, but lacked the courage to use it. Meghan's supporters repeated one argument with growing force: only Catherine could welcome her back. Inside the palace, that pressure caused alarm. Advisors warned that approving the request after a public campaign would create a dangerous precedent. Royal privilege would no longer appear to come through service, trust, or the sovereign's judgment. It could be secured through exposure and emotional pressure. No one could prove where the leak began. Suspicion moved between a Sussex ally, a careless intermediary, a palace opponent, and someone determined to destroy reconciliation before it started. Harry was reportedly furious when he learned the private proposal had escaped. Yet even his anger raised questions. Did he blame the palace for failing to protect it, or did he suspect Meghan's advisors had prepared the public argument in advance? His call with Charles was tense. Harry insisted that Archie and Lilibet should not suffer because of choices made by adults. Charles understood the pain, but he also knew the children had been placed at the center of a much larger demand. William wanted the complete document released. He believed the public should see what Catherine was actually being asked to approve. Senior advisors resisted. Publishing private conditions would expose family conversations and turn a controlled crisis into open war. Catherine chose silence. Publicly, she gave nothing away. Privately, she questioned whether compassion and royal duty could still exist together when every gesture risked being used against her. Then, advisors noticed something unsettling. Polished talking points had appeared almost instantly, repeated by figures sympathetic to Meghan. The response felt prepared. Catherine finally made her decision. It was not the refusal William expected. It was a counteroffer and a test. Catherine's answer would offer Meghan a path back toward the family, but it removed the cameras, the ceremonial equality, and the public symbolism, leaving only the question of whether reconciliation was ever the real goal. Catherine did not respond with anger. She responded with conditions. Meghan could return privately, bring the children, meet the family, and honor Diana away from the cameras, but the ceremonial role, official recognition, and public appearance, she requested, would remain firmly out of reach. The counteroffer was carefully designed. It gave Harry's family a path back into private royal life without reopening the position Meghan had once held. Archie and Lilibet would be welcomed under protected conditions, introduced to parts of their heritage, and allowed a discreet opportunity to honor the grandmother they had never known. Catherine agreed that the children should not be denied their history. But she refused to let their access become a doorway through which Meghan could reclaim public royal status. The conditions were strict. There would be no personal filming, no independent photographers, no commercial use of private moments, no immediate interviews, and no advance briefing of sympathetic journalists. Every part of the visit would remain confidential unless the palace later chose otherwise. Meghan would not appear beside Catherine in an official role. She would not be described as an active representative of the crown, and the visit would not be presented as the restoration of the Sussexes' former position. Harry received a separate offer. He could meet privately with Charles and William without advisors or carefully prepared statements between them. It was a chance to confront the family conflict directly, but also a demand that he stop allowing intermediaries to speak for him. For Meghan, the proposal may have felt less like reconciliation and more like humiliation. It granted access to the family while withholding recognition from the institution. She could return as Harry's wife and the mother of royal grandchildren, but not as a royal figure standing beside the future queen. William supported Catherine's decision, though he remained uneasy. Even a private visit, he warned, created risks. Trust had already been broken, and every confidential exchange now seemed one conversation away from becoming a headline. Charles felt relief that the door had not been completely closed. Yet he feared Meghan would reject any arrangement she could not publicly define, document, or defend. That fear was also the hidden test inside Catherine's offer. If reconciliation was truly the purpose, privacy should not have been an obstacle. Then, Meghan's representatives asked whether the visit would eventually receive an official palace acknowledgement. The question immediately revived concerns about legitimacy, public image, and whether family access was being treated as a step toward institutional restoration. Harry was trapped between gratitude and anger. His children might finally be welcomed, but Meghan's requested role had been denied. Before a final answer arrived, details of Catherine's conditions leaked. Palace officials reached a chilling conclusion: someone was deliberately keeping the conflict alive. The second leak destroyed what little trust remained, and as William moved to shut the entire process down, Catherine prepared one final response this time, written so clearly that no one could twist its meaning. By the time the second leak reached the palace, the question was no longer whether Meghan could return. It was whether any private agreement with the Sussexes could survive long enough to matter. Catherine's final message would protect the monarchy, but it could permanently divide the family. The answer was firm. Catherine withdrew her personal support for the arrangement. She would no longer sponsor Meghan's return, defend the proposal inside the palace, or attach her name to a reconciliation that had already been exposed twice before it could begin. The door was not completely closed. Archie and Lilibet could still have private contact with their royal relatives under carefully controlled conditions. But no ceremonial position would be created for Meghan, and no public role would place her beside Catherine as an equal representative of the crown. William demanded an end to informal negotiations. From that moment forward, every approach would pass through official palace or legal channels. No trusted friends, no historic intermediaries, no private promises that could later be interpreted, expanded, or leaked. For Charles, the decision carried a painful cost. His hope for a quiet reunion with Harry and his grandchildren had been consumed by arguments over status, control, and public recognition. What should have been a family conversation had become another battle over the monarchy's image. Harry felt betrayed from both sides. He believed the palace had judged Meghan's intentions before giving her a genuine chance. Yet privately, another doubt remained. Had the request gone further than he had approved? Had his emotional promise been transformed into a demand he was now expected to defend? Meghan saw Catherine's response as confirmation of her deepest suspicion. The monarchy might accept her privately, but it would never recognize her as an equal. To her, the conditions did not represent protection. They represented exclusion disguised as compromise. The greatest consequence fell on the children. Archie and Lilibet remained connected to royal history by blood, but their ceremonial future would now depend on trust, and trust had almost disappeared. Catherine's final message drew a clear line between family and monarchy. Meghan could approach the family privately. She could not claim the authority, symbolism, or privileges of the institution without accepting its duties. That was how the palace protected itself. Not through dramatic punishment, but through silence, distance, and controlled access. Perhaps that had been the trap from the beginning. Either Meghan returned with status, or Catherine became the woman publicly blamed for refusing her. Only then did Catherine fully understand why the request had stunned her. It was not merely what Meghan wanted. It was the impossible choice hidden inside it. Now Harry faced the final decision: accept private reconciliation without Meghan's conditions, or walk away once again. The request had promised reconciliation, but its exposure revealed something far more dangerous. Inside the royal family, the greatest battles are rarely fought over titles alone. They are fought over who controls the story, who inherits the future, and who is forced to carry the blame.